This is an extra video I've decided to make in response to some comments I got on the previous video in which I explained where I got this machine from. This is my first laptop, and the point of the video was the repair of this. Had an issue with the backlight. But as part of this, just to try and make things a bit more interesting, I just gave a very brief history of why I had this. As I said, it was extremely expensive. It cost what amounted really to a year's salary. Now, although I'm talking here about my personal acquisitions, these are machines that I personally owned rather than the ones I used as part of the work that I was in. I, even back then, as I do now, recovered the cost of this through work I did with it. Now, as part of the lead up to showing this machine in the previous video, I gave a very brief, and I did say at the time it was a very brief overview of what led up to me getting this. And as part of that, I showed this motherboard, and I said that it came from a 5150. In fact, what I said was that this is the motherboard I took out of it, and I glossed over a lot of the history. We're talking here about a period of about 12 years in which I was very active in collecting this sort of thing. Now the comment said that these were very expensive at the time, so I probably didn't have one. But just to address that, I did make it very clear in the video that I didn't buy it. I got all the bits to put it together as from different sources as faulty units, but I didn't ever go out to a dealer and buy a 5150. I never said that I did. In fact, I made it very clear I built a Frankenstein machine. Not only that, but if you have been watching my videos, then you'll realize that I have a fairly high throughput of work. I do an awful lot in fairly short amount of time. And I didn't have just one board and one case and one monitor and a keyboard. I gathered piles and piles of this stuff, as I do now, but with more modern computer equipment. It's only over the last few years where I've been going back and trying to collect older equipment, but this is one I kept out of interest. While I don't want to go into any great detail of that period, I just thought I would clarify a few things to address the comments that were made. Which were that the machine this comes from is not a 5150, it's a 5170, and therefore I was lying. There is too much detail to go into over that period of time. It would be an extremely long and very tedious video, and the video was not about this, it was about the laptop, so I was just glossing over most of the history. So this video is just going to be a recounting, very brief recounting. I'll skip over a lot of it still, so it'll be fairly boring, so I suggest you skip the video. This is really addressed at the individual that left the comment, just so we can get some kind of understanding as to what goes on with people that collect this sort of thing, and especially back then. Now, this is a one-off. In future I won't respond to argumentative comments. If you want to make any comment, you're more than welcome to. I'm not going to block anyone. You can make whatever comments you want, but I won't respond to just arguments. I don't really see why I should. I'm putting these videos up for entertainment. They're meant to be informative, but some things I will have to gloss over. I've been doing this for over half a century, so I do have an awful lot of history to go through, and I can't possibly cover that in a single video. So the reason I ended up with this is, as I say, it was from any source I could find. I would acquire cast-offs, basically faulty equipment, or equipment that was taken out to perform upgrades. Now, I got hold, as I said in the previous video, of a 5150. It was a bare bones case and motherboard. I realised looking at the video I implied this is the one that came directly from that. Now, when I make a video, I have really slow broadband, so it takes me nearly 5 hours to upload a 30-minute video, so I tend to edit a lot out. So unless what I'm talking about is specifically related to the video content, then I may gloss over some things. So if you do have any specific questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. but if it's just argument and contradiction, then I'll probably just ignore it. So I had this 5150 chassis, and it actually had in it a floppy drive as well. It had a motherboard. It wasn't this motherboard. Very similar to this motherboard, and it had various cables, and it also had a hard drive controller card. But that was too badly damaged to be recovered, and it had various parts missing, so I couldn't get hold of them. It's not like today when there's a big there's eBay or something you can usually find parts from. Parts back then were very hard to get hold of. I also stated it was worth a huge amount of money once it was working, and he seemed to take exception to that by saying it was worth a lot of money, which I thought was a bit of a strange comment considering that's exactly what I'd said. So what I ended up doing was taking the 5150, and over a period of around 3-4 months I acquired various parts, and from the point when I got all the parts I needed, it took me about another 3 months to get it working. Now, I acquired the 5150 at the beginning of 1983, and I said that was early 80s, which again he seemed to want to contradict and say that's not early 80s, which in my mind I'm afraid yes it is. Now that machine was a bit of a Frankenstein. If you're not familiar, what you have to do is the motherboards don't really support anything other than the processor and the card slots. If you want to add a hard drive, bear in mind not all machines had a hard drive, and in fact I used the 5150 with only a floppy disk for the first 3 or 4 months. You can boot from floppy disk, you don't need a hard disk, and that's what I was doing. Now I did eventually get a 10 megabyte hard disk, and if you haven't seen old hard disks, they're not like modern ones. These are full height and take up a double bay space. Now the 5150 case I had some parts missing. It had some of the internal metalwork damaged. So I took the board out and I put the 5150 motherboard into an AT case. And if you're not familiar with the ATs, then here's a picture of one. This is the machine as it ended up about 2 years later. I'll come back to that in a minute. Once I'd done that, I then started acquiring control cards. And as with anyone that's been interested in this, you don't have a single machine that you keep indefinitely and throw away, at least not back then. You tended to upgrade them. And I probably went through upwards of 200 upgrades in one form or another. So the first one was obviously to fit a hard drive controller card, a video card. It was a very simple video card, and it drove a small green monitor. I then upgraded that 9-inch green monitor to an orange monitor, so you can see in the photograph. Once I'd got the basics of the machine working, then it was a case of using it, and that's the point at which I started learning to program with it. And almost on a daily basis I was acquiring new parts, bits and pieces, and one of those was to upgrade to a later motherboard. It was a later 5150 motherboard, which I don't have. Bear in mind, this was back when a lot of this was just kind of collecting junk to a certain degree, but it was invaluable. It was very expensive stuff, but I didn't retain all of it simply because I don't have space to keep everything I've acquired, and this was over 30 years ago. Ultimately I got an even later motherboard, which is this one, and this came out of an AT. Now this was faulty when I got it. There are various jumpers on the back, and these I believe were put on at the factory, but some had been torn off and one track was lifted on the top underneath. I can't remember where it was now. I can't remember. It was a long time ago, I can't remember, but I did some fairly minor repairs to it and got it working. There wasn't any memory in it. I took this out of these memory chips out of another board. These are quite interesting, they're piggybacked. Anyway, I got these out of another motherboard, built this up, and this is a later motherboard. It's what I upgraded to, and this is an important number up here for anyone that's interested. And by that time I'd had the machine for, I guess, 3 years. I then went through a whole series of upgrades over the following 3 or 4 years, and it ended up with a colour video card, extra RAM cards, multiple hard drives, and that's the machine you can see in the photograph. Now, I didn't have a digital camera at the time, so I didn't take hundreds of photographs, and yes, Mr. Pedantic, I know that digital cameras were available at the time, but I didn't have one. So what I ended up doing was taking this card out, and I ended up fitting a 386 motherboard into the same machine. Ultimately, I got my hands on a DX2, that's the 486, 66 motherboard and processor, and you had to buy them separately at the time, and it was a rather large amount of money for me at the time. It was one of the few things I bought new. Upgraded that, so the machine you can see in the photograph is not running this motherboard. I can't remember exactly when the photograph was taken. I think at that point it's running the 486 motherboard, which is why I still have this. I've taken this out, and this is one of the ones I retained. I actually retained it for the RAM, which I've never used. I also took out the coprocessor, which I do still have, and as I say, this is the reason that I show this motherboard. This is the one I ended up with. The machine itself is long since gone. It wasn't worth a lot of money other than the case, because what was inside was relatively new stuff, which is why I wasn't too concerned about throwing it away. Unfortunately, it would have been better now with hindsight to have kept the case. So when I'm going through these explanations, and what I've just told you is a very condensed version of what went on over a period of nearly 10 years with this particular machine. So as I'm describing this, I'm giving you the pertinent points. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail unless you specifically want it, but as I say, I won't respond to any more argumentative comments, but you're free to make them if you wish. But that's why I have this, but the point of the video wasn't this anyway. It was why I ended up with this. And just finally, yes, he's absolutely right. It was worth a huge amount of money at the time, but I never said I bought it new. I could not have afforded it new. I was at college at the time, didn't have any money, which is why I was scrounging parts, got a job, still couldn't afford to buy anything, and my major investment was this, which is really why I made the video. So I hope that explains it to our friend, and as I say, I will be skipping over a lot of information in future videos, but if you have a valid question, or you want me to expand on something, or I haven't made something clear, then please leave a comment and I'll try to address it. But as I said, I won't respond to argumentative comments. Life's too short, and it's not really what my channel is all about anyway.